Good morning or afternoon, wherever you may be. This is Interchain Live. I'm Ryan Munn here in Vermont, speaking with Keir Finlow-Bates from Finland. So I'm really excited for us to be able to even get our schedules to match up somewhat to be able to have this conversation. And Keir and I met a little bit on LinkedIn discussing blockchain and patents. And so, Keir, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks very much, Ryan. As was said, I'm Keir Finlow-Bates. I'm a blockchain inventor and entrepreneur at the moment. Used to work for about 20 years for large companies in various sort of high-tech industries, but now I'm going it alone. So that's my background.
Awesome, awesome. And how long have you, been into technology? Let's start there. Technology, digital background, like kind of when did you start tinkering?
Pretty early, actually. When I was about 7 or 8, I got an electronics kit. I don't know if you remember those old Tandy ones with little springs where you connected wires between transistors, things like that.
Okay. Yeah.
But first time I touched a computer was in 1981 when the ZX81 was released by Thinklair Research. So
okay.
Yeah,
right
so
on.
That's quite a while back.
And what was your initial fascination? What was the exciting thing about it?
I think, like most kids who got into computers, it was just that there was this machine and you told it to do stuff, and if you got it right, it would actually do it.
Right.
And of course, things like the old Atari games console came out around about then, and the fact that you could actually write a little Pac-Man-like game yourself was very exciting.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, so now let's bring us fast forward a little bit. How long have you really been paying attention to the blockchain sphere?
Right. So actually someone at the place that I was working gave me Nakamoto's original paper, and that would have been, so it would have been late 2009, I think, that I first saw it.
Okay.
And I thought it looked really, really interesting. But at that point, I was still very much a techie. And so I was looking at the computer side of things and the way all these different components, like peer-to-peer combined with cryptography, actually worked, and didn't really have a clue what the meaning behind any of this sort of digital currency or all the economics and politics.
So you got the math and the cryptography side, kind of technical side, but the sort of higher finance stuff that was going on
just
was sort of
right over my head.
A whole different ball game. Yeah. So,
exactly.
And was this when you were at Qualcomm?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, at that point, it was still Atheros, the Wi-Fi chip manufacturer, which then got acquired in 2011 by Qualcomm.
Oh, no kidding. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
And so what was sort of your next step from there? Was it sort of this thing, okay, I read this paper, yeah, I kind of know about it, but what did you do with it from there?
Yeah, well, so read the paper. I think I downloaded the C++ source code from GitHub at some point, not too long after that. But unfortunately, C++ is probably my least favorite programming language by a mile.
Fair enough.
So I had a kind of glance through it and decided that no, I wasn't going to see if I could contribute anything. And then after that, I would just occasionally talk to people about it. It sort of kept cropping up occasionally. Someone would say, have you looked at this? And it's like, yeah, I have, and I'm thinking about it. But it really wasn't until about 2012, I think, or so, before I started following news articles about it and actually kind of getting more involved.
So your interest initially was technical. You looked at the code a little bit, but decided not to put any real time into that aspect of it, but you continued kind of staying plugged in. And so when you started to really connect with it, was it a little bit on a different level? Did you get in and start coding then, or were you kind of more looking at different aspects of it?
Yeah, so I was sort of writing some code to see if I could replicate some of the stuff. Back then, there wasn't masses online. There was this fantastic article called 285 Bytes That Shook the World, which was a guy analyzing the Genesis block of the of Bitcoin and looking at what all the data meant. And that's sort of when it really clicked. And I think at that point, I did buy a small quantity of Bitcoin and started submitting transactions and seeing if I could automate wallet activities and things like that. And digging deeper into the stuff, because I knew some of the stuff. But for example, I'd never come across Merkle trees before. So I knew hash-linked lists. I knew a bit about peer-to-peer. So that's when I started looking at all the components in more detail. So that was really the trigger. I don't know what the date from that article was, but I know a lot of people who got into Bitcoin and blockchain. That was one of the things that they looked at. Not even sure it's online anymore, to be honest.
No kidding. So, sorry, repeat that. What was the name of that paper again? Or do you recall it?
I think it's called 285 Bytes That Shook the World.
Okay.
I think I've got the number right. It may be a different number, but
okay. Well, it's a catchy name. I'm sure we can track it down. That sounds interesting. Excellent. So now, where did you go from there? So this was a hobby while you were you're still working at Qualcomm at this point. It is Qualcomm, and and this is sort of a hobby thing that you're working on. Is it something that sort of crosses over with your work at Qualcomm, or is it completely?
No, not at all. I was a test manager for some of the GPS software that phones use in order to pinpoint where you are. So that was the developers were doing sort of signal decoding for the satellite signals, and then they'd write the code that actually could calculate your position on the planet. And then me and my team were making sure that things like if you cross the international date line, does it still work? You know, stuff like that. Does it work if you're below sea level? Because there are some places on the planet, which like Death Valley or the Dead Sea. I don't know why they're all named after dead things, but anyway, they're below sea level. So, you know, a coder makes a mistake and suddenly it puts you somewhere, you know, high up in the sky because of that. So things like that. But in my spare time, I was submitting invention ideas, which the patent division of Qualcomm would then talk to me about. And they had a decent patent award scheme. And I think at that point, I was even submitting some blockchain patent ideas back in 2013 and 14 and so.
Interesting, interesting. So can you share with us some of the, or some perspective on some of the blockchain patents that you hold currently or that you participated on?
Yeah, so one of the great things about blockchain is that Nakamoto just put it all out there in the paper. And I think that's a nice parallel with the internet, that when DARPA and Vince Cerf and people like that, Tim Berners-Lee, were putting internet foundational stuff out there, it was just open. And it just gave us all a great platform to start building on. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the great things for blockchain is that it's the same thing. The foundation started off open and free. And then you can start looking at where you can build value. And once you start building value on top of a platform, then it's good if you know that your foundations are safe. And then you can start staking a claim in a particular area you're interested in. So I was looking at particularly at data transfer and authentication originally. Mm-hmm. And I've also, so I think the ones I had at the moment, a few things to do with location, some things to do with digital certificates, revoking and assigning and authenticating digital certificates, things like that. And there's a whole bunch more stuff coming up that's pending at the moment, things like file provenance and some IoT stuff as well.
Gotcha. So what makes something patentable in terms of blockchain? I mean, it is open source, right? Satoshi wrote mm-hmm. the white paper, so that idea is out there. Is it, you can, even though it's out there, can you improve upon it and then patent that? Or then is there also a whole sort of separate description or analysis of how the code works, and then you can make alterations and patent that?
Well, obviously it's software, and software carries some tricky things when it comes to patenting. And in fact, there's a lot of controversy about whether or not software should even be patentable. My take on that is I think software should be patentable, but it should be, the scope of what can be patented within software should be considered very carefully. And as for being able to patent stuff, well, yes, if you build something on top of the foundation that's new, then that is patentable. Pretty much every invention out there is an improvement of an existing thing, or it uses existing things put together in a new way, possibly with some other novel part. But there's very... Sorry, go ahead.
That's a hard thing, though, because, right, because you know, Bitcoin, for instance, is transmitting money. And then, but then the way our system works is kind of complex and cumbersome and you know, outdated. But in order for us to use Bitcoin effectively in today's business world, we have to come up with sort of a business model, which, you know, whether it's a piece of software or a business functionality, in theory, you could patent that and say, oh, well, you know, we're using this underlying tool to transmit money, but we have this way of doing business with our customers that creates that interface, and that's justifiably patentable, perhaps, or maybe that's you know, an obvious sort of service level commodity service type of business where anybody from any community should be able to go, oh, we can do that, and we can provide that service to our community.
Yeah, I know that certain business processes are theoretically patentable. I think it's probably even more thorny than patenting software as to whether things are going to be allowed or not, and whether they get overturned later. So I wouldn't know, and I certainly have never tried to patent a business process. But what I was thinking was more things like if you could write some software that automatically detected that a certain transaction had taken place, and as a result conducted a new transaction. That's not going to be patentable now, but maybe early on you could have got a patent for an automated escrow system, for example, right? So that's using the blockchain, it's using digital currency, but it's doing something with it that nobody has done before. And well, you might...
The concern is that then somebody gets a patent on this and then restricts anybody from using it, and then they use it as a leverage to go into places where maybe somebody's developed it open source and they're doing it anyways, and they go in and sort of flex their legal muscle to essentially take over business doings, business happening.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the point of patents, right? I mean, it's the idea is that there's a contract between the inventor and the state, which is that the state wants to guarantee that, firstly, things that are invented aren't lost, and secondly, that things that are invented are revealed so that other people can work on improving them. And of course, there's a trade-off. You know, the inventor is going to need some kind of compensation for the fact that they're revealing their secrets. And in return, society is meant to benefit, and it's meant to encourage further innovation. And I mean, this actually worked very well for the US in the early days, because it just, it was a very, very innovative country. You know, it was the place to turn to if you wanted to patent something, because it was the place of business. And I think patents helped the US a lot in that you have an idea.
I would also argue a little bit that the patent model itself is really kind of an open source model, because once it's patented, it's a public record. And while it may be restrictive for you to go do something with it without paying your dues, it does create a repository for you to find ideas and things to be built upon to further innovation. And so to me, it's just kind of really just an old version of what technology enables today at a protocol level of providing this open sharing economy, and now having these digital assets that we can then use as sort of keys or licenses. And then it's not about a patent's good for 20 years or 10 years or 2 years or whatever it is. It's as long as that unique token is the best opportunity in the market to utilize that mechanism, then it's of high value. When other people figure out how to duplicate that mechanism or provide an easier or better service to that mechanism, then that those other parties become competitive, and that's sort of the continual free market, you know, economy wheeling.
Exactly. It kind of encourages, when the system is working, it encourages rapid innovation. You know, you have your patent, you know you're safe in your sort of core business, but you also know that other people are going to be coming up behind you, and if they overtake you, then you may fall behind. So it does kind of accelerate business and invention. But that is, of course, if the system actually works the way it was intended to.
Right.
And
So now with blockchain specifically, we're talking about generally open source software, open white papers that have been shared with the world, and then everything from that is stemmed from this sort of wasn't it published under a particular license actually? Was it the MIT license, or was it?
I think that well, yeah, I think there was even a license on the paper, but of course it's the only thing you have on a paper is copyright.
Basically dictate that like other things that are enhanced upon it are still open, right? So they can't be.
Well, that's not what the MIT license does, you see.
Not the MIT, okay.
Yeah, the MIT one just says, here, I'm putting this out there. It's like published academic research. It's now human knowledge. Anyone can use it. The one you're thinking of is the GPL, the GNU public license. And that's the one that I think Microsoft, like 20 years ago, described as a virus. That if you put if you use some GPL code in your software, it infects the whole of the rest of the code, and that becomes GPL license 2. And the EFF, the Electronic Freedom Foundation, is quite diligent in sort of following up on breaches of the GPL. So, and you know that has an advantage in that if somebody is trying to make a piece of software, and they really need a piece of GPL code in there, it kind of pulls them into the family of GPL, and it has its place. And the license doesn't stop you from making money off this, right? You can take a piece of GPL software and you can sell it for whatever price you want to charge. The only issue is that you have to make the source code available to anybody who wants it. So you kind of, actually, it goes back to this patent idea again in a way, doesn't it? You know, you give other people a chance. The only difference is that you don't have this sort of period where you are the sole user of that system. So you don't get that. But the rest of it, it does open things up again.
Right, absolutely. So now, you know, what should we be thinking about in terms of patents versus GPL licensed blockchain applications? I mean, you know, if I'm a business looking for blockchain solutions, certainly I may be predisposed to thinking, oh, I want to make sure that, you know, I either, you know, get a good deal because I just get a single user license and a company can thrive that way, or that I get the ability to relicense whatever I pay to have produced by a developer. But the other side of that is, well, if I'm developing something that taps into this open source repository, then I also have that whole community that supports it. And now with blockchain, again, with token economics, there could even be a viable economic sustaining system that really supports the developer community and supports that ongoing maintenance of the code and of the network. So should I, if I'm a business owner, look for these closed door solutions, these private solutions, or should I be looking for these broader, more open sort of perhaps GPL license type solutions?
Really depends on your business, I guess, right? If what you need is a big community, then you really have two options. One is you need to get some outside funding in order to be able to grow the user base quickly. This is sort of the Uber or Facebook approach, right? Burn lots of cash, get lots of users, and then work out later how you're going to monetize them. And the indications are that having a big user base is inherently valuable. And the other approach, of course, is build something that a particular group are really, really passionate or interested about. And but that tends to be a bit slower, and there's a lot of competition out there. You can't just build it and they will come. Techies are forever coming up with things that they personally find fascinating, and then they put them up on GitHub and make them open source, and then they wonder why nobody ever downloads what they've done and nobody works on it. There's a lot of things to choose between, and people only have so much time. So I think it depends on the business, right? What you were saying earlier about the sort of token for rewarding stuff, I think things like that are popping up. I mean, in a sense, that's kind of what the ICO was meant to be about. But as is usual with new ways in dealing with significant sums of money, it all sort of got a bit messed up, like the gold rush in California, right? A lot of people in sort of mid-1800s suffered a lot of hardship. I don't know if you've seen documentaries about Klondike or how things went. However, it's also indirect, despite the fact that very few people got rich from the gold rush. It's indirectly responsible for Silicon Valley, the immigration, the nature of that state, and the fact that it allowed for Silicon Valley to eventually arise probably can be tracked back to events like the gold rush. So we were kind of in a gold rush due to ICOs back, last year, the year before. Now we're trying to work out how we can do it properly. And hopefully some of the money will flow to the right places and actually build that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now, what are your perspectives on the money in the patent business? Because one of the arguments is that it really favors those who have significant capital to put into the research and development, and someone with a great idea is really kind of either shoved to the side or taken advantage of. And then again, on the open source side, the argument that I tend to make is that while we have these laws in place to enforce it, those laws are in fact theories because they're not 100% enforceable. So there's always going to be some kind of slippage there, and perhaps it's potentially a riskier investment to sort of put your eggs in the basket of being able to protect this intellectual property that, as we accelerate in our information sharing society, becomes harder and harder and faster to lose control over that intellectual property.
Yeah. So firstly, you're right about the cost. I mean, patenting and patent litigation has been described as the sport of kings, because you're looking at 5 to 6 figure sums to get a patent if you're using legal using attorneys. If you go into litigation, you're looking at millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or when the big boys actually start fighting each other, then we're looking at billions sometimes as numbers cropping up for compensation. So it's not the kind of thing that a software developer in his 20s in his bedroom is going to be able to get involved in. I mean, the reason why I'm involved in patents is because I taught myself how to draft my own patents. Working for 10 years with patent lawyers in a big company, and actually not doing what most developers do, which is hand over the invention and then try to have as little as possible to do with them. I actually asked them questions about, you've written up my invention, but you seem to have written it in this gibberish, using words like comprising instead of contains and a plurality of instead of several. What's that all about? And then they start explaining the history behind these things. So it can be learned as an individual, but you have to be kind of enthusiastic about it. The problem with litigation, of course, is that I'm never personally going to be able to defend one of my patents against a large company. I just don't have the resources. What you can then do is you can do a no-win, no-fee case, where if you can find there are law firms out there who say, we will litigate this patent for you, and we'll only take 70% of the revenues that we make, you make from that, right? And of course, 30% of a large sum of money is much better than 100% of nothing. But this is what I was talking about earlier. When the system works the way it's meant to, and I, as a lone inventor, think that it's meant to provide something to lone inventors. The system has changed. It involves an awful lot of money. And this is where you get these problems with things like big companies having massive patent wars, and with non-practicing entities or the patent trolls arising. Companies whose sole purpose is to squeeze money out of people because they hold a patent and they have enough money that they can follow up with their threats to litigate if someone is accused of being an infringer. So, I mean, these things are not great, but it's not surprising that they've arisen, right? This is sort of human nature. That's how we work.
Sure. So you have, was it 9 patents currently?
At the moment, I still have 3 granted, with a 4th one coming out in a week. And then I think I've got another 16 or so pending.
Oh, okay. So quite a pipeline going there.
Yeah, it's a bit of an assembly line. It takes about 3 years from the original filing to actually getting a grant. And unless you're willing to pay an extra couple of $1,000s, then you can have it within 6 months to a year.
Right. Now, are these all sort of complementary in different ways?
They tend to focus on particular areas. So when I was looking at blockchain plus database ideas, in connecting databases to each other over a blockchain, so that different database systems, my SQL could talk to Oracle, could talk to Microsoft SQL Server, and the whole thing would be decentralized and tamper-proof and backed up. I thought this would be a fantastic product. I think now that it was 5 years ahead of its time, which is why it didn't sell. So I have some patents in that area pending. And then there's the IoT stuff, which is, I was looking particularly at provisioning IoT devices with certificates, which is a bit of a problem at the moment. So that kind of thing.
Okay, interesting. And so you're currently, so Chainfrog, is that your new company around the inventions?
Yeah, so I started Chainfrog back in 2016, and with that, we were trying to make this database product, and in the process, I was also filing patent applications. As it turns out, the product that we made, it's not uncommon in the startup world, it didn't sell, and we ended up basically putting Chainfrog into sort of hibernation. So it's now just sort of an asset holding company. And I'm the only person of the original 6 of us who's still involved with it on a regular basis. The rest have all moved on to other stuff. And actually, yesterday, you're showing now, I just set up a new company for myself so that I can move on to doing further blockchain research and developing more patents that are just for me. Because if I do anything under the Chainfrog name, it goes to the shareholders as well.
Gotcha. So Chainfrog is basically the patents that you've got currently in the works.
Yeah, they're held by Chainfrog.
Okay, and then Thinklair is your new spin up.
Yeah, that's the new one. At the moment, with Thinklair, I'm focused on blockchain and supply chain and RFID. That's my area of interest there.
Awesome. Now, tough question here. If someone out there is watching and they're, they've got some real ideas potentially in blockchain, maybe they're even coding or developing or have an MVP built, what should they be thinking about in terms of patenting, or what could they really be patenting in what they're doing, or how do they go and sort of figure out where patenting comes into the equation for them?
Right. So for a startup, it's really kind of tough because you're short of money, and you've got a lot of things to consider, a lot of sort of juggling going on. So I think most startups don't really consider IP very thoroughly, and it's understandable. However, of course, at the point that your startup actually starts taking off, the engine, as it were, is kicked in finally, and you're looking at getting investment in order to tune that engine and make more and more money, then you have to start looking at how you can protect the product that you made. And often by that point, you've already sold copies of it to customers. So in that case, it's not patentable anymore because it's been disclosed. It's no longer novel. People know about it before you file the patent. So I think, on the other hand, I think investors in companies see it as advantageous if a startup has some IP. You know, there's an advantage to being a first mover in a field, and there's an advantage in having the speed and agility that a startup has. But having some IP to back that up is not going to be, you know, it's not going to be detrimental.
Right.
So I think startup companies should think about what they want to patent, and in particular, they should think about what are we going to be working on in a year's time, when what we're working on now is functional and is selling. Are there any enhancements on top of this that we're going to be pushing next? And that's what I would go after for filing a patent on once some money is coming in. And then the other thing I would look for is draft a patent that has everything plus the kitchen sink in it. I never understood this when I was an engineer. The patent attorneys would say, are there any other ways you could do this that you can name? And are there any workarounds that you know of? And are there any other clever things that you could do? And if you mention some, they would put them in there as well. Because there's this thing in US patents called continuations, which is if you describe a big table of all sorts of ideas that kind of fit together nicely, and then you claim a particular section of it, you can file continuations where you can add more claims and get more protection. So you can actually take that original patent, which has all the ideas in it, and it'll kind of continue to grow. It sort of has children, effectively, that do things that are sort of related to the parent, but cover slightly different areas as well. So I'd make sure that you file maybe only 1 or 2 patents, but that they have this potential that as your company raises more money for you to file continuations and get more protection in the area you function.
Leave all the doors open.
That's kind of the thing. Yeah. Don't and it's worth putting the stuff in there, because then you've got protection for it, and it goes from the date that you filed the parent.
Right.
So, it's not from when you file the continuation.
Now, a startup or inventor, someone, should they go to a patent attorney or a patent agent to start sorting this out first? Or should they go to someone like you and say, hey, how can we partner? Because it sounds like part of what really helped you succeed was that you were inside of Qualcomm, right? You had that umbrella of a big corporation that sort of put that shell around you. And are there ways that businesses like yours, or maybe there's others out there, that effectively partner with inventors and ideists to get their project out there in a way that's monetizable and supported by a bigger organization?
Yeah, I think for the standard startup where you have your idea and you're executing on it, you need to go to a patent attorney, unless you happen to have somebody who is obsessive about patents and actually has spent the time reading up about them. Because it's I mean, I've been drafting patents now as an amateur for 2.5, 3 years, and looking at them for a decade before then, but I don't have any formal qualifications. The US Patent Office is really helpful towards individuals who are filing patents rather than having lawyers. So they do assist. There was this America Invents Act that Obama signed into law, which actually kind of made it easier for lone inventors, or pro se inventors as they're called by the patent office, because nothing can have a sensible name.
Right. So they have they have made it a little bit easier for.
Yeah, they have an assistance office, and the patent examiners. Well, I'm not going to say they're meant to go easy on you, but they are meant to kind of guide you. Attorneys are meant to know this stuff. Of course, if you're not an attorney and you don't have the qualification, there are going to be things you might miss. And it's not a patent examiner's job to teach an attorney. They're supposed to already know it. But the current system says that, yeah, somebody who is not an attorney, if you see they're overlooking something, you should, as an examiner, help them out. And most of them are pretty supportive, and actually most of them are really keen to talk to me, because they kind of go in enthusiastic about invention and technology. You have to have a STEM qualification and a legal qualification to become a patent examiner. So they all come from an engineering background. So it's kind of nice for them to deal with a real inventor rather than yet another lawyer, I think.
Right, right. So maybe we just need to get the patent office onto some blockchain solutions, and then we'll really merge the fields, because there's definitely a lot of crossover there.
Yeah, possibly.
Excellent. Well, Keir, I think we're coming up on our attention span limits here. I really appreciate your time, and I think we could continue the conversation sometime. This is really excellent dialogue. I really think that people need to be thinking about intellectual property, as well as the strategy of making sure people can't patent stuff. Like you said, when you do put it out there, it becomes unpatentable, and sometimes that's a strategic advantage that that someone needs to consider. Or maybe it's already out there, so you need to figure out what your strategy is because of that. And so I think it's really exciting stuff, and I think there's a lot to learn. And I look forward to seeing more of what you put out there in blockchain.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me on your on this, Ryan. I very much appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you to the audience for joining us. It's been wonderful. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.